Today's supply chain success is driven by a combination of speed, reliability, and innovation. The concept is easy to understand. Executing on this is where it gets tricky, especially in a global landscape that seems to be constantly changing, with no indication of settling down anytime soon. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table, where we sit down with industry leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs to discover hidden opportunities, big ideas, and best practices. Today we're joined by Sean Coxall, chairman of 707 Limited, a leading provider of worldwide sourcing options and innovative supply chain solutions. Previously, he served as president of Lee & Fung's branded fashion and sportswear group. With a major focus on speed and innovation, both in terms of product and new business models, Sean pioneered the use of digital technology, in particular through the use of virtual sampling. In this podcast, he'll be sharing what he sees as both the challenges and the opportunities in an apparel supply chain that's quite a lot different from what it used to be a few years ago. Before we get started, if you're looking to find out about growth opportunities in the apparel industry, from retail markets to sourcing developments, then you might want to take a look at Inside Fashion. Each month, you'll get a clear, concise view of global sourcing and retail markets. Why not join leading supply chain and retail executives worldwide who trust Inside Fashion to help them benchmark performance and anticipate what's next? You can learn more at insidefashionlive.net. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. Now let's sit down with Sean and learn about what's happening in the apparel supply chain. So we're going to tackle the very exciting and sometimes frustrating topic of the apparel supply chain, which I know just seems to get crazier and crazier every year.
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. We always think can't get any more complicated, and then we're thrown another curveball.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, having had a leading role for decades, really, in the apparel supply chain, in the heart of it all, right here in Hong Kong, what do you currently see as the biggest change? I mean, there have been a lot of changes, but what do you see as the biggest change in terms of, from a brand's point of view, you might say?
Well, I think the biggest change I've seen is really the growth of what I call a new demand chain. So if we look at how we used to actually, develop and source goods, retailers and brands would, create ideas, and we'd spend an awful long time actually creating samples and then approvals and then go into production. And, by the time the goods got to the store, it would be a very long time. And quite often they didn't sell. And then there was a lot of markdown. So I think, we spent the last few decades trying to reduce time, trying to do things faster, shipping things in a very complicated way to get them to the stores faster. Then we, went down a whole track with sort of digital sampling and trying to digitize things. But actually, what I've really seen is that a lot of the new brands, particularly the online retailers, influencers, they're actually connected to their customers very closely. So actually what happens is they really know what their customers like. So actually they don't have to make things very complicated. They basically find out what their customers want, and then they go and find out how to get it. And you'd be amazed, Jane. I mean, they have very uncomplicated systems. We work with some people who just send us a photo or a diagram or a few words. And, we have a very good PD and design team here, and we can make things very quickly, whether that be design or production, and we can ship them very quickly. And, what these people have is that they pretty much sell out. So it's not really a change in the sourcing that I've seen. It's really a change in how they connect with the consumer and find out what the demand is. And I call that the new demand chain rather than a supply chain, actually.
I think that's so interesting. And I like the way you talk about a trend towards simplification, because I think that oftentimes things just get out of hand, right? We keep layering things onto legacy systems without really changing that foundation. And oftentimes, right, as you're suggesting, you end up with a very tangled up foundation or organization, right? That sort of gets in your own way.
That's right. And, one of the, the phrases that I think is very, very key is that, it's very simple to make things complicated, but actually it's quite complicated to make things simple. But I do find with a lot of these new retailers and brands, they really have found by keeping it very simple, actually, they really do benefit. And I think we've just seen, the latest curveball in terms of tariffs, which has caused an absolute upheaval in the whole sourcing world. And nobody really knows what's going on, particularly the US customers. And I've seen a lot of them actually holding back and not even placing orders. So I think we are going to see a surge. I'm also seeing, countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, actually full to capacity. I'm seeing longer lead times. I'm seeing increased prices, and I'm seeing them very unflexible in terms of, MOQs. So actually, believe it or not, I mean, where I see a huge opportunity is China. And actually, if you look at some of the established factories in China that we've known for many, many years, they have tremendous expertise. Actually, they are quite competitive. On some recent pricing that I've done, I've found prices in China even to be less than some of those countries that I mentioned, particularly Vietnam and Cambodia. And in terms of MOQs, these factories are very flexible. 300, 500 pieces, or even 1,000 pieces is not a problem. And if we look at the raw materials, we still see most of the raw materials coming from China, especially trims. So what better than to go back to where we started this whole journey, which was China, and at least, go back and have a look what you left behind. It's like, they always say, you don't know what's good until you lose it. And
Right.
I think that's very true of what we had in China. Also in Hong Kong, there are some wonderful people here who have tremendous knowledge and expertise in terms of sourcing that, perhaps have lost their job or their business has gone down. And those people are hungry to actually, help again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. There's an awful lot of what you might call overlooked resources that we've just assumed are no longer valuable or no longer valid. Maybe that's a better word for it, where we maybe need to take a look and reevaluate and start to think to ourselves, sometimes, everything old is new again. So I think you're right. We look at China as having 30% tariffs, but you have to look at the base cost, right? 30% on a lower cost is not necessarily worse than 20% on a higher cost.
No, and I think you also have to look at the product. I mean, everybody got very excited. Let's take denim as a category. Everyone got hugely excited about laser machines and all the technical machine development. But actually, if you want a really good pair of jeans that looks authentic, there's no better way than doing that with them with hand finishing. And if you want hand finishing, China are the experts. Actually, in some of the countries that we mentioned, they don't even know how to do the hand finishing. So I think that whether it's, good quality, beautiful make or authentic finishing, no better place than to go back to China again. So,
Yeah, I think, off the record, a lot of people will express that to me, brands that is, when I'm talking to them, just me and them, an office meeting or something like that. The top line that, narrative is leaving China, de-risking and so forth. But when you actually talk to people one-on-one, they're not so eager to leave China. They need to put some of it out. They don't want to be wholly reliant. But as you're pointing out, it's very hard to match the capabilities that you get in China elsewhere.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So I do hope because, we have a lot of these wonderful factories, they've got a lot of capacity at the moment. They're short of business. And I do hope that we can bring some business back again. Otherwise, some of them are going to close down and we're going to lose those resources forever. It reminds me a little bit like Europe, actually, when we moved a lot of production out of Italy and out of Portugal and we moved it to Asia. We lost a lot of expertise in Europe, which is very hard to find now if you want to go back again. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. Now, we've looked at a lot of these things from a brand's point of view, but what about for suppliers? I mean, it seems that throughout the supply chain, suppliers are always struggling, right? They always seem to get the brunt of it. And right now, as we've looked at all these different shifts in the market from one destination to another, tariffs, logistics costs, and so forth, where are there, if there are, hidden opportunities that suppliers could be taking advantage of or better positioning themselves for?
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I think, look, honestly, I think it's all about, being flexible. I mean, there are orders out there. There always are orders. But, I think, as I said, some of the new countries are already full. Quite often now you go to some of those factories and they quote you very long lead times. So I think vendors that are looking for business, if they can be flexible with their timelines, do things quickly, be flexible with their MOQs, everybody starts somewhere. What I've seen as well is if you actually start engaging with some of these smaller, newer brands, it may be small today, but it can very quickly grow tomorrow. And, there are no new billion-dollar customers. Let's face it. A lot of them actually have gone bankrupt. So we have to find new ones. So there are billions of dollars of business out there, but perhaps it's in small segments and chunks. So I think that people have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of what they're willing to accept.
I think that's a good point. And, you're absolutely right on that. And I've heard this from a lot of different people over the recent years as it's gotten more and more difficult to deal with these, very large brands because of the risk factor, as you're mentioning, in and out of bankruptcy for some of them. Yet at the same time, factories, as one person put it, are addicted to these orders. They're like crack addicts, right? They just need to get the next order and will sacrifice anything to get that. So I think the point you're making about being willing to look at these up and coming brands is important. And yet at the same time, there's this relentless drive to find that next unicorn, so to speak.
Yeah. I'll give you one example. I mean, an inquiry this week from a US customer said, absolutely no China. We don't want China. We want, Cambodia or Vietnam or Bangladesh, but we need 1,500 pieces, So, the factories that we know really are not very keen to take 1,500 pieces or below unless they're in China. So we went back and said, hang on a minute, those countries other than China really won't accept your minimums. How about we do LDP or DDP to protect you from any sort of tariff risks that you have and give you a beautiful product from China? And they said no. So actually, there's no solution to actually helping them. So I think that not only is that I think the brands and retailers, particularly in the US, need to be a little bit more flexible and less scared. And if the vendors are willing to give them a LDP or a DDP, I think that's okay, And, that's what people like us are here for also, is to help to manage those situations,
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that, that brings us to another aspect of changes in the market, because we went through initially, people worked with what you may loosely refer to as middlemen, right? Whether you call them agents or, people who were acting as representatives or whatever. And then a lot of that, as you know, was taken out. People felt that they needed to go direct. They could save money, have better control. But now that it's become a lot more, let's say, risky in the industry, right? A lot more variables and things. It seems, and it may be just my point of view, correct me if I'm wrong, more and more brands of all different sizes are finding that working with an outside partner like that can be very beneficial. What are you seeing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, actually, if I tell you an interesting story about how I started my career. So I was actually a buyer for Marks and Spencer in England. That's where I started in the fashion business. And actually all my vendors at that time were either in England or they were close by in Europe. So basically in the same time zone. So what we used to have is what we call reps, representatives, that were people that actually had an office in the center of London, very close to the Marks and Spencer Baker Street office. And if we had any new development or we had any issues, we would call the representative in, and they would be the bridge between, the customer and the factory. They were third parties. They were not employed 100% of the time by the vendor, but they would actually employ them as a representative. What then happened is the production all moved to Asia, and actually having those people was no benefit anymore because they were not in the same time zone as the factory. And also they're close to the customer. So we got very excited about sourcing agents. But, as time developed, sourcing agents, take quite a large cut in terms of, their remuneration. And people realized that they could go directly to the factories. But what I've seen happen actually is almost go back to having the representative again. So having people that are in country or in Hong Kong dealing with China that can help, actually will help with the product development, perhaps, the approvals, and do the liaison between the factories. So I do see a big opportunity, to have this direct relationship, but have representatives over in Asia here, especially as we see, less business travel. I mean, the cost of a trip now, from America to Asia is horrendous, not just in terms of the money, but the time, even the jet lag. So if you have people here and basically, the factory is paying their salaries, it's not coming from the customer, there is no extra margin being added on the top, then I think it's a really good model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that, it's become more complicated as sourcing has become more diversified in recent years. When everything had consolidated, sort of post WTO and in all those, I guess it was 2 decades or more since then, it was a little bit easier because you were in fewer countries, right? Fewer vendors, fewer countries. Now, as you're having to go into so many new countries, as you're saying, you have to understand stuff about a country that you might not know. Learning curve is high. Who has time to travel all over the world and still do your day job? So I think you're right. It's interesting, the new roles that are coming up as things change like this.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that, being very clear who does what.
Yeah.
For many years, the role of sourcing agent, there was a lot of double work, basically. And they had to do that really to justify the commission that they were charging. But actually today, if you look at it, you really just need somebody to help you with the business development, maybe, language barrier or product development. You don't need to double up on the merchandising or the quality or the compliance. Let the factories do that. They're good at that. But actually just help them with what they're not good at, sales and marketing, basically, and product development. So I think that, that's the big change, is sort of taking out the excess workload and making sure that we don't have any duplication on either the customer, the vendor, or the representative side.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've talked a lot about the U.S. tariffs. I know that that's just been top line news because it impacts basically every country in one way or another. So, of course, in the apparel industry, that's also been headline news. But what about the challenges that European brands face? I'm talking about European brands who aren't selling a lot into the U.S. So in that case, the tariffs really are not a big part of their, day-to-day business. What do you see in terms of the challenges that European brands are facing right now?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that, they've been developing all these other countries for quite a long time. And now the Americans have come along and stolen a lot of the production. So I think that, they're facing price increases. I think the other thing that's always been a struggle for European customers is the MOQs, the minimums. And again, that's why I see China as a huge opportunity for our European friends, because there's capacity and also the MOQs are not an issue, and also prices are very keen. So I think that, if European customers can perhaps reopen their eyes on China again, I think they'd be surprised actually how competitive they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I know that, there have been issues that people felt like they were overly reliant on China. There's always, no matter what country you go into, there's always going to be issues on compliance, issues on, transparency, issues on geopolitical stuff. If it isn't one place today, it'll be that place tomorrow or the day after. Do you feel that in some ways, perhaps, the negative feeling about being in China is a bit exaggerated? It's not that there wasn't any reason for concern, but perhaps the narrative expanded beyond what it might be.
Absolutely, Jane. I mean, I think that honestly, and what's interesting is, I know lots of big US companies, where the board have dictated no China. And actually the sourcing offices here in Hong Kong are struggling actually to find other countries that are as good as China. So I think, if you compare it to like technology, what about Apple? I mean, they dominate the world, right? And we've allowed them to do that. And every time somebody comes along to challenge them, they always find a way to keep their foothold. And I think the same could be true of China. So I think it's a total overreaction. And I think that everybody should reevaluate. And there's nothing wrong with having a large percentage of your production there if they could deliver what you need, which is speed, flexibility on MOQ and good prices, and which they can.
Yeah, it is interesting. And as you're saying, and I've heard this from multiple other people who I speak to, and I'm speaking to people on a daily basis in the industry to try to understand from their point of view what's happening and, uncover any blind spots that I might have. And there is a very big concurrence that it's very hard to replace China, that nobody wants to be overly reliant on any country, right? Common sense. But that, trying to really move everything out of China or most things out of China has not been advantageous for most brands.
No, and actually there's a big risk involved, if we're honest. I mean, if people chase things for, a few dollars, even pennies, there's a big risk. Are you going to get your delivery? Is it going to be of the right quality? Who knows, tomorrow, Trump could add another 10% to any of those countries, right? So it's just a matter of time. So it's not really a safety when people move out. It's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, I think. So I do hope that in the coming months, as things calm down, as he gets perhaps, the confidence is restored a little bit between the relationship between, China and the US, that people will start to think about coming back again.
Yeah, I think so too. I think some of that tension is easing up a bit. I'm not saying it's going away, but like what you're saying, the capabilities in China, plus the fact that some of those tensions are starting to be worked out a little bit. I think both countries are realizing that they're better together. They don't have to like each other, but at the same time, there are huge strategic advantages on both sides, right, of being able to at least work together on the supply chain side of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think so. So I think I'm super excited, to see how we can make Hong Kong and China great again.
Yes. Well, I think everybody here is looking for that. I think that, that's really the long-term goal, is to be able to leverage everything that we have here, everything that's been built, the tremendous investment in infrastructure, which is literally world-class. You only need to go anywhere else in the world to appreciate what we have here. I think that there's a lot going for us here that has been, in a sense, sidelined, perhaps.
Yes, I think so. Well, it's like anything, right? The grass is always greener. People are always attracted to something that they think is better. And then you try it for a while and you realize what you had was really great. So we're ready and we're here waiting for those opportunities. So quite excited.
Yeah, so am I. And I think that, what you're talking about in terms of developing individuals or companies that are able to, like you say, act in an intermediary capacity is very, very interesting. And that could be the way forward, as you pointed out, to be able to bring business back, not just to this part, not just to Hong Kong or China, but also, worldwide, to be able to facilitate that, because it's very difficult for most brands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And look, it's a change in business model, right? Which we always have to think about. quite frankly, I feel the same in the travel industry. You know, we got rid of travel agents. And I don't know about you, but every time I try to book trips online, I make mistakes. I perhaps booked the wrong date because I didn't fill it in properly. You know, one of the great thing that a representative does is the clarification. So they take information from both sides and they make sure it makes sense. And they actually look for problems and they rectify them before they happen. And I think there's a very big role to be had there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to hear what you have to say and to try to get feedback from people who are actually executing on some of these things. I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this has also. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge.
Oh, not at all, Jane. Listen, I'm very passionate about, you know, what we do here. I've been living in Hong Kong for over 25 years, and I would love to see Hong Kong and China get back to what it's good at, you know. So thanks for the time in exploring some of the ideas with me.
Thanks for being with us here today on A Seat at the Table. If you'd like to see some of the other episodes, head on over to our podcast website at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. There's also a link here in the show notes. And if you're thinking that you'd like to be a guest on the show, you'll find information on how to apply there as well. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in the next episode.